Hello? Hello? Yes, it does work. We're going to get started now as today is midterm review in the architecture department. Other people will be streaming in. And we'll turn the lights down so they'll know that serious stuff is happening. I'm Stephen Rost. I'm the interim department chair of the Department of Art and Design. I think everybody knows that, but we're not here for me. We're here to celebrate Steve Coy's lecture. So I put together a quick introduction. Steve is a faculty member and assistant professor of the Department of Art and Design. He brings to the department a wide range of academic and personal art and design experiences, ranging from site-specific installations, photography, video, design, performance art, just to mention a few. I'm sure he'll mention a few through his talk. Steve holds a BFA from University of Michigan and an MFA from the University of Hawaii. And I'm sure his students, I'm sure he brings the surfing culture to his critiques and to his classroom and maybe tonight's lecture. With his wife, Dorota, they founded the Hygienic Dress League, and I'm sure he'll speak about opportunities to invest in this venture tonight, maybe?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I have to bring that up.
His or their work is found throughout the world. And just a personal anecdote, Steve and I were in Berlin together with students a few years ago, and I was off on a little personal journey in the city and some remote area of Berlin, and I happened upon one of their installations that was very specifically cited. He travels extensively throughout the world, and peppering his art in unsuspecting walls. Locally, their work can be found on the De Quindercut, Eastern Market, Midtown, and up north, where is the piece?
Port Austin.
Port Austin.
Yeah, you'll see images of that.
Okay, so I encourage you to get in your car or ride a bus to any of these locations and experience his work. His work has been written up in the New Yorker, the New York Times, the Rolling Stone magazine. I hope you read Rolling Stone, it's pretty good journalism. USA Today, The Economist, Art Ruby, Bad at Sports.
It's a pretty great art blog.
Is it? Okay.
A prestigious one. I don't know how many people actually know about it, but people in the art world celebrate being written about.
Pop culture, Juxtapose, and the Huffington Post. Steve is a valued colleague of mine, a friend of mine, a friend to the students and to our faculty, and he brings a lot of energy to our department, our college, and our community. And I give you Steve Coy.
Thank you. I feel like that was half my lecture, so no, I don't. Generally, I talk a lot more about my work, and I thought tonight that I would talk a little bit about public art and street art and put my work into that context, and then also talk about some of the programs and work that I do here with students. And with that, I actually have three of my students here that are going to come up and talk a little bit about some of the projects that they did in the context of art in the public realm and this program that I've been running. So, and this little video will make maybe a lot more sense by the end of the lecture. So, again, I'm going to talk about public art, and this in no way is this going to be like really in depth because we don't have enough time. It's street art as a subset of public art, both as a style and a movement. And basically, it's all a movement, so I'm going to talk about it as a style and more of an ideology. And I'll talk about why I believe that they've split. Hygienic Dress League Corporation, which Steve Rost mentioned, which is a public art project of mine, ongoing conceptual. The post-industrial condition, and this is going to be very brief. I'm just going to talk about why artists are interested in it and what's happening. the impact of this type of work. And Phil, Lucas, this is going to be you. I'll set it up, and then you're going to jump in. We'll talk a little bit about architecture and how it relates to this whole movement, and Breck will be talking about that. And then we'll be talking a little bit about social messaging and as it relates to all of this. So, public art, let's start there. This is Juame Plensa. Is anybody familiar with this work? So this is a beautiful example, right? It ticks all the boxes. It's in a corporate place. There's people around it. And I think even the definition of public art says, physical object in a physical space, okay? So like I said, it's something that's expected. I'm hoping, it's probably what people expect. I'm hoping to broaden the perception of what people consider public art. And so to do that, I'd rather than talking about it being a physical thing in a physical place, talk about what it's not, and then let all of the possibilities around that happen. So if it's not in a museum, and it's not in a gallery, and it's not in a private collection or home, that leaves everything else open to the possibility. And I say that because it could be digital, and we might see some examples of digital. It could be a conceptual thing, and I'll talk about that as it pertains to my work. And it could even be the internet, right? The internet is this weird kind of public-private space as well. And here, this might be the first public art project, right? And so if you think about public art or art in general as this form of human expression, this probably happened the moment that humans didn't have to think about survival anymore. So they started to create and draw. So just a little history. But to begin to broaden the perceptions, this is a public art piece by Slinkachu, and it occupies a much different space than the Juame Plensa, right? You might not even see this. Here's another one. Little rowboat in the milk. This guy's having a bad day. This is Aaron Bartal, and this is a Berlin artist, and basically this is a USB port that he went and installed in different places around the world, and this is a way for people to plug in and exchange files openly. And there was, when I was looking at this project, I found that he had did one in Detroit, right by Avalon Bakery. I don't know if I got there too late or somebody stole it, but it was gone. So how many of you are familiar with this piece? Yeah, Spiral Jetty, Robert Smithson. So yeah, I'm just showing all of these pieces that I think at the time that they came out were pushing the limits of what public art is. In fact, this is not very public at all. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it took me 3 hours down a dusty road. I didn't even think I was in the right place. And when I got there, I swear the same sign-in book from when it was built was there, and it was only like half full. So on that note of discrete public art, Andy Goldsworthy, this is a piece that probably doesn't even exist today. It falls apart. Somewhere along here, there's a water line. So these are just sticks built into a lake. Here's one that's made of ice, so you may happen to run into it at that time. This is a Hoffman duck in Hong Kong. Has anybody seen this piece before? Yeah. Yeah, so I like this example because, again, it's a physical piece occupying physical space, but it's a performance, right? It's gonna go away, so you may happen to run into it. And what I love about it is that it's unsuspecting, and so that's where my interest lies as an artist, is to really do something unexpected in an unexpected place and broaden the audience that I might reach. This is a project called the Artvertiser, and so these group of artists wrote code so that you could look through these glasses, and now obviously it's onto tablets that you can look through it, but it basically takes a billboard and replaces it with digital work. I'm just going to show you a quick video. There it is. Maybe I'll jump ahead. This is in Berlin. Here they're showing you how it might work, and then I'll advance it so you can see some examples of actual. Air helmets are super cool. But honestly, what I love about it, and my project touches on this too, is that it levels the playing field between artists and corporations. So corporations are always invading our space. I don't think about those as art spaces. I like this one too, the chicken running around in the background. So they even kept the integrity of the original advertisement. All right, that's enough of that. And by the way, some of these examples, like Slinkachu and this next one that I'm going to show you, fall within the street art movement itself. This is Joshua Allen Harris. And so these are, what you're seeing is sculptures that have been made out of garbage bags. And so this is New York City, and the subway train, these are subway vents, so as a train goes by, these things animate. I think that's a fish in the one's mouth. Yeah, so again, much different than what you may think of as public art. And it lasts as long as it lasts, right? Somebody may come by and rip it off or mistaken it for an actual piece of garbage when the subway train isn't going by. All right. Now we're on to street art. So street art is a subculture. It's a subset of public art, and the point at which a lot of people think it started was with this person named Guy Debord, and he wrote a book called Society of the Spectacle. And basically, he talked about how humanity was trapped or programmed in this society that was run by corporations and media, and that you were programmed to go to work so you could make money, so you could buy all these things. And he called that the spectacle. And so what he did, and this was in the 50s and 60s in Paris, was he went and started writing on buildings and walls in the street to kind of jar people from their spectacle. And we're going to talk about spectacle again, but it's going to be in a slightly different context than this spectacle. But really, I think in terms of the ideological movement of street art, this was the birth of it. And so I look at it much as how the Dadaist art movement was a foreshadowing to postmodernism. So this happened, and then it was many years later when we started to get graffiti writers writing their names, and of course their motivation was much, much different. They were just looking for that like name recognition and tag to write it on. But this is what started happening after. So we're in the 80s, and I'm sort of just going to jump forward straight into the progression or digression, depending upon how you look at it. If you're a graffiti writer, you might think this is a digression. Street artists might think of it as a progression, but this is a piece that's in London, and I showed it because it's amazingly beautiful mural, but there's also another piece that I have that's right up here, and I'll talk about that story really briefly. And we're going to get into, I put this one in as a foreshadowing for the social messaging piece, because it allows, the great thing about street art is that it cuts out the curator, it cuts out the institution, and it just strips away all the barriers between the artist and the spectator or viewer and audience, okay? So, and the work that I really love is the one that considers its context, and that one's a little gruesome. But. This is a Russian street artist using a light pole very cleverly. And then even this, I'm looking at with my own work how to transcend traditional street art. And so here's this piece by day. You don't really notice it, but if you're in the right place at the right time, the shadow gives it some more meaning. Here, I couldn't resist, sorry, putting this in. And then, yeah. Okay. So, so now let's talk about it as a style, because there's that saying, you con the art world, and then the art world cons you. So there's all these street artists decided to cut out the institutions and the galleries, right? And they're bringing their art straight to the public. And then what these galleries and institutions realized was that this was becoming very popular. So they decided to start approaching these artists and getting them to do the work into the gallery. So you see, this is some gallery in LA, I don't even know what it is, but you can see that there's paintings that are very much of the graffiti style. And so that's where I think the split has happened, because you have Banksy's going to auction and Sotheby's, and so there's this whole commodification of the movement. And so that's where I say, it's a style there, because it's no longer the ideology of the street art, because it's back within the institution, right? So now me, where does my project fit in? So I'm very much in the spirit of the street art and stripping down those barriers and reaching broader audiences. And this is the name of a legally formed corporation in the state of Michigan. And so think of, we don't actually do anything, we don't manufacture anything, we don't sell anything. So think of Nike and take away the shoe. Here's Microsoft's revenues from 2007 to 2010 in the billions. This is Hygienic Dress League's revenue for those same years. It's zero. Which basically leaves us with this idea that our mission is to promote our mission, right? So we're just like this hype branding machine. Within the corporation, much like our social structures here with the upper middle class, upper class, middle class, and lower class, we have 3 tiers of employees. These are the executives. And here they are again in front of a vacant house in Brush Park in Detroit. These are the transporters. They're mid-level employees. Nobody really knows what's in those suitcases, but they carry them around everywhere. And these are extractors. These are the lowest level employees. And so there's a lot of symbolism within the golden mask and the uniforms, but sadly I will not get to all of that right now. But this, talking about it, and I think Breck will get to it a little bit more about the context of architecture. But this is, I think this is we're kind of honoring the architecture there by painting the windows and not actually on the building and drawing attention. But this, I think, is a spectacle of a different kind, different than the one Guy Debord was talking about, because it actually brings attention to the building, and I think that's what that's potentially what art has the power to do, is to draw attention to things. And nobody was really paying much attention to that. And of course, there's other economic situations that are happening, but this is basically now a restaurant. And very different. So this is another piece that's in Detroit, in the doorways. We did this one on Woodward, and it lasted about 4 or 5 days, and it got erased or buffed, if you guys are familiar with that term. And so we did it again, and you can see new location up in the corner. Here's another one in Detroit. I'm just going to go quickly through all these, and it's not even all of the work that we've done, but essentially trying to give you the sense that we proliferate. Again, transcending traditional street art. This is a neon piece that we did. It's on a vacant hotel. It says no vacancy. It's a neon sign. This is a performative piece, and the golden bird is our logo. And so we're taking these pigeons and painting them gold and then putting them on the shelf. Here's another one that's kind of referencing Renaissance paintings that you see, and we're comparing our characters to deities. So again, these are the executives. A piece in London, another piece in London. You can see we're just putting our characters out there, and we can create a narrative through all of these pieces, right? I had to tell you a quick story about this right here. So we were with our artist friends in London. We came to look at this spot, and I said, I want to paint there, and they were like, yeah, you should totally do it. We're like, all right, we're going to do it. So we came the next day, and I noticed this was here, this little writing that wasn't there before, and it said, I came to London, and all I got was this crappy photo of some crappy street art, right? Something like that. And I was like, this is great. If I paint my piece above that, will be the crappy street art that this person is talking about, right? So we did it, and a day later, Banksy came out and said he did that piece, and so that was our first collaboration with Banksy. But it's actually what's great about street art is it's kind of a free-for-all. You can create dialogue like that. The piece with the elephant head and the tentacles, this is one of our characters. Actually, while we were waiting to paint that other piece that you just saw, there was a parking attendant, and he said, you can't paint there, at least while I'm here, wink, right? So he told us when he was getting off work. So we went to the market and bought a mannequin, and then we climbed up to the second story and mounted an extractor up there. This one's Berlin. Is this the one you saw, Steve? No. This one? This one. There's Łódź in Poland, another one in Łódź. So again, you can see the pigeon is our logo. We're branding it. This is on PNC Bank. It lasted a really long time, and I have a feeling it's because they had to go through the whole corporate hierarchy series of chains to figure out what to do with it. Here's a picture of someone taking a picture of the piece. And then here's a picture of somebody trying to peel that off. We're really good at what we do, so I feel bad. That was probably really hard to scrape off. And I think they ended up just painting over it. Some more advertising. Here's the piece in Port Austin that Steve was talking about. And so in this piece, we considered the landscape and the audience, and so you can see it's not a graphic image of a pigeon, but one that's maybe in a more rural style with the font. Here's the backside of the piece. It's a remix of American Grant's of American Gothic by day. This is an entire gold building that we painted in Cleveland. And there it is by night. It really lit up the street. New Orleans, Hawaii, Detroit, DeQuindercut, other side of Detroit, DeQuindercut, Oakland, LA, Toronto. So we printed our artwork on toilet paper and started to install it in different bathrooms. So really just to, again, I don't know why corporations haven't done this, because they're invading every other part of our life, but I thought it was really funny to actually go in and not only am I giving toilet paper to the restaurants, but there's this moment where I know somebody's pulling that out and wondering what the hell this is. So these ended up this is in New York. These are all New York. That's Toronto. It's Madrid. That's Madrid. That's Lisbon. And I think a lot of this, symbology somewhat speaks for itself, but maybe not necessarily. So again, broadening the perception of what we think of as public art. This was, my wife and I made a 30-second commercial and aired it on television. So we actually bought time, and I think it showed up during the Ellen DeGeneres show, and I don't remember what else, and the late night news. Rachel Ray, thank you. I was during Rachel Ray. So. So appropriating something that would be traditionally, oops, what happened? Appropriating something that would be traditionally thought of for a corporate space. And here we did, one of my students calls us Stanley Steamers, but it's the sewers in Detroit throw a lot of steam into the air, and so we projected video into it and created probably the most ephemeral kind of street art possible. It was just these holograms that were, I tried to upload the video, it didn't work for whatever reason, but you can check it out on YouTube. But we projected the video into the steam, and it created these crazy holograms. So, and what's interesting about this is a lot of people within the movement within the global street art movement are talking about work like this and how it's interesting that it becomes more known beyond its actual happening, because I saw like this was a cold night in March, like 2 years ago, and there was like maybe 4 people that saw it, but then you think about how many people actually see it beyond that, or how it gets disseminated beyond that. So a lot of artists are, and I don't think I approach it that way, but are thinking about ways that their projects can be disseminated on the internet, potentially more than how it is actually existing in the street. And then we're developing some interactive type stuff, and so we're looking at doing some interactive installations in LA and Montreal right now, and they'll exist on storefronts as projections, and so this is just a quick prototype. Okay, and so that leads me to the IPO, what Steve was talking about. We're a corporation, so we're thinking about ways that we can push the legal limits of a corporation from an art perspective. And so we thought about what would happen if we took this company or corporation that does nothing and we sold shares of it so people could invest in this nothing, right? So it brings up a lot of questions of value, and it's interesting in postmodernism right now, it's really hard to determine what makes something successful. So oftentimes it's based upon the monetary value. So there's a kind of direct commentary towards how we value things, and it maybe just goes towards how we value things in society in general. But again, to circle back to the public art conversation, from a legal standpoint, we might be able to argue that this is the only true public art project that exists, right? The public company. Okay, the post-industrial condition. So artists have been, for a long time, moving to cities like Berlin, Detroit, Lisbon, and I'm naming those because these are where we've had our programs and done work. And just a couple bullet points, they do it. You guys probably already know this, but they do it because there's lots of space. It's cheap. There's a need for creative solutions, so you can actually, it's places where you can actually have an impact. It's hard to get real estate in New York City and some of these places, unless you're a famous artist and within the institution and the gallery and the museum. And I don't know why I put often dangerous. That's just a kind of a side note, but. It sometimes helps because the police will be distracted with other things while you're doing your work. So now I'm going to jump on to impact, and Phil's going to come up, not yet, maybe. But we were talking about how we wanted to measure public art or just work in the public realm in general. And so we came to a chart that looks something like this, and I have the green line as human interaction, and so it goes from observable to interactive, right? So observable is like all I can do is look at it, and interactive is something that dialogues or interfaces with you somehow. You can change it, affect it, and on the economic impact scale, we put spectacle and pragmatic, and so we can place any project into this realm. And this is a different spectacle than the one I was talking about with guided board, but what I mean by spectacle there is something that brings attention, creates attention, and has an economic impact because of that. And then pragmatic is something that's more of a direct economic impact. And I'll just go through some quick pieces, and then Phil, you can come up and talk. But this is an interactive art installation. There's kids jumping on them. The light pads are changing colors. This is a friend, Bo Stanton. I love his work. I had to put it in here. That's a piece he did in Toronto while we were there doing our piece, and it's pretty much observable. I mean, I guess you could touch it, but I don't know why you would. Unless you wanted to feel it. I put this in as spectacle because I was thinking about, in terms of the human interaction scale, it's more than observable because I believe you could climb on it or walk around it and experience it a little more than just observable. But if you thought about something like this landing on a vacant lot in Detroit, it might attract people there, which in turn might attract a hot dog vendor or somebody else to come around and build off of that spectacle or energy. And then I don't even know if this is a great example of pragmatic, but it's practical, and I think of the Sit on Detroit, those benches they have. So, but somebody who did a lot of great research and talked to a lot more people than I did, because it was this project in Lisbon, is Phil Lucas. And you can just give it to Brad.
Thanks. So Lisbon is known internationally as the city of tolerance, which I think is really interesting because tolerance means not only the way that we look at it as we think of people different than themselves as we tolerate it, but as in tolerance, as in it's an entire cultural experience. They're tolerant of anything from people wanting to do what they want in their own personal lives, to in their public, to the way that they perceive culture. It's an incredible mixing pot of the world, in my opinion. Lisbon's one of the greatest places like that. And so Steve's already kind of talked a little bit about how we interface or contact with art. And so these are the two pieces that I think about when I first started thinking about art. So when I was in Detroit before traveling over to Lisbon, I would ask people, what does art mean to you? What does public art mean to you? And everybody would say the DIA. They would say it's public art, right? I can go there, it's free, it's public. And then when I go over to Europe and I ask people, I say, what is art? And they say, it's, food, it's orchestra, it's dance, it's sport, public art. It's more than just, I don't know. It's a very interesting way. We're very in a box here. And that was the one thing that I realized when I was over there was, holy cow, the world looks at art so much differently than Americans in general as a whole look at art. And so that's what I wanted to focus on with the next piece, which was how can art impact us on an entire scale of also economics, because I'm an MBA student, so it interests me from a financial perspective of what art can do for us. This is the LX factory, or as the Portuguese call it, El Xixi. This is an old industrial complex. It actually used to look like this back in the day. I'm totally lying. That's actually the Packard plant, but look at the similarities. It's important. When you look at the Packard plant, it's vacant, it's sitting there, and this is what the Portuguese government did. They said, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna let people open shop. We're not gonna sell the space, we're gonna make it public for everybody to go into, and there's artwork all along these alleys, and it's huge. It's probably just as big, if not bigger, than the Packard plant. And this is how vibrant it is every single day when you go through there. Incredible. So yeah, that's the Packard plant. It doesn't look like my text showed up here, Steve. No, this is, I had some text here. That's all right. Yeah, so this is actually, Yeah, so this is artwork. There were some notes I had on the side here to go over, but in essence, I kind of already went over that. I'm going to go through a little cycle of how artwork influences economics, and that was kind of my summary slide. That's a piece from it's great. They called it El Cheesecake because El Cheese is how they called the factory, and so they had a little cheesecake place called El Cheesecake, and my mind was blown, or I guess your eye, light bulb, whatever, was blown. That's a piece along that same area. So I thought, okay, you have this factory that reminds me so much of the way the Packard plant could be, and so how is this cycle of economic development working? Because there's got to be something that makes places fail, but also the same exact industrial post-industrial area be successful. So what are some of those driving factors? So I first thought, step one, an artist walks up to a wall that's vacant or a property that's vacant and decides to paint it. This is beautiful, but it's not, it's just kind of the first step. Or as Steve showed, taggers. Somebody will come up and just tag a wall. Step one. Step two, people love it, and they start doing things. This is actually, they were shooting a commercial next to this street art in Lisbon. It's just great. It's public art, and they're using this for a commercial, which then drives more people to go, wow, this is pretty interesting. And then you have people parking here, and then they go, and maybe that's when you have the hot dog cart, and all of a sudden somebody decides, I'm going to open up a restaurant next door. Delicious El Cheesecake. And this is a cheesecake place right inside this factory area. It never would have had a need for it if it was vacant. And now there's cafes, there's libraries, there's bookstores, there's coffee shops, and they're all along this place. And you're starting to see this. And if you think about Detroit, that's another great example, as Steve mentioned. You have this space that was painted, and then all of a sudden somebody drives by it and goes, wow, that's really nice. And then there's an investor or a real estate person which will say, hey, I want to buy that. And then they'll sell it, and then somebody will come and open a shop there, and you have this cycle. And then eventually, things will fall apart, and you'll have an empty wall. And it'll get painted, and it'll repeat. And that's life, right? We're all in a big cycle of life. And that's the way economics works. You have cycles, you have movements, you have pluses and minuses. These things all go together, which just blew my mind when I realized that this is happening. And these are things that you can see in many stages throughout the world, and hopefully we can learn from them. And that was when it all came back to the project here. These are little note cards. Please check them out in our gallery space that the Lisbon class put together out over in the staircase brick gallery, yeah. But putting everybody together from our class, I was kind of the wrapping economic piece. So the actual official name of my project was the Creative Catalyst for Revitalization, which is just what I explained. But in essence, the main pieces that I wanted to focus on were how can we use street art to promote walkability, which promotes density, which promotes economic development. And then therefore, how can we do that in Detroit? Because we have so much space in Detroit, we have a lot of creative talent in this area. How can we use that to help identify and promote future entrepreneurial spirit? And one of our classmates, Miriam, she actually did a pop-up shop in Lisbon where she actually used clothing as like an art form where people would walk by and see it. You can look at public art in so many different ways, but it can also be something that can help you start a business. And that's the most important piece that I think that I really got from this. And so that brings me to this. So what's this? Can anybody see this? Like what this is? What do you think it is? Go ahead, don't be shy. Chairs, desks, tables is actually pieces of an old factory. There's robots and all sorts of other pieces, and they're all just kind of jammed in this corner. So, yeah, and it's actually like for printing and like all these pieces, right? This whole factory had all these little pieces in it. And this is in this area that I was talking about earlier. And this gentleman walked by this space and thought to himself, I really like playing around with robots. I think I'm gonna lease this space out and start to make art with it. And he does these cool little robot art pieces that'll go around and make little characters and lines. And now he sells them. He was walking by the street and saw some art and then realized, maybe, I want to I don't know, this seems kind of cool. This is a sweet location. This is a pretty creative area. So art can impact so much more than what we sometimes realize. And from an MBA perspective, from a business perspective, because I'm not in the College of Architecture and Design, that was really exciting for me. And I hope that people will be able to use that to continue to revitalize Detroit, because that's where I think we really have a lot of possibility and a lot of momentum going. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Breck, because once you have these beautiful spaces, there's architecture that goes along with that, which hopefully you will all probably care a lot about. So with that, Breck.
Yeah, we'll just take a little tangent from what they've been talking about here. Obviously, there's a fine line between art and architecture. A lot of artists are architects, and a lot of architects, I would say all architects are artists in some way, shape, or form. But I'll just touch on a few examples that I think kind of bridge the gap between street art and what they've been talking about and what we do here in the College of Architecture and Design. This is one of my favorite examples. This is just an internet picture. A guy got drunk and inflated a hot air balloon inside of his house. And so I think the two qualities that would define, you remember the chart that Steve was talking about a few minutes ago where it's pragmatic or it's a spectacle. I think anything that has to do with like architectural installations lands a little bit more towards the pragmatic side and a little bit more, well, definitely towards the interactive side. I think it needs to be, yeah, and the quadrant, it's like the lower right-hand side. In order to qualify as like the bridge between architecture and art, it has to be interactive and it has to influence or change the space around you. It's not just something you look at. It's, there's a term out there, interactive architecture, but a lot of people perceive that in many different ways, and this is just one way of thinking about interactive architecture. So there's a firm called Panique Productions. It's a Barcelona firm that does installations, and a series of their installations was just that. They took these outdoor courtyards from museums or different plazas or palaces, and they were inflating giant balloons made from hot air balloon material inside of these spaces, which completely transformed what this exterior space would have been into something completely different. This one was actually done in Lisbon. We didn't get to see it up, but this was at the old World's Fair grounds, where they actually inflated these things in between flagpoles and took what was an exterior, just flagpole space and transformed it into these monolithic hallways that people could walk through. And again, another example, this one actually had like a reflecting pool in it, and they inflated, again, one of these balloons inside of it and transformed an exterior space into an interior space. So these all had to do with the transformation of space, and very quickly. It was a rapid transformation. They would come in, they had these pieces pre-made, and they would lay it out, and then they would turn on the fan, and 10 minutes later, this place would be inflated and completely change the space that you were just in. If you're not familiar with Alan Parkinson and his traveling project, The Architects of Air, you should definitely keep an eye on it. I know they were just in Ann Arbor last year. But what it is Alan Parkinson is an architect who became fascinated with these pneumatic structures that he could inflate and then take down and transform space wherever he went. Obviously not extremely pragmatic. It's more of a spectacle in this case, because it's just something that you can look at, and that's what he came out and spoke about, that the reason why he does this is because there's such spectacular interior spaces, and he really loves to work with this. So he has like this cathedral type atmosphere that's inside of these structures. But when you look at them from the outside, they look they're whimsical and crazy. The top is, one of these structures. They travel around and they erect this, and you pay to get in and you walk around it for half hour, and then make your way through it. And then the last of the examples is Tomas Saraceno. This looks like a crazy rendering you'd see in the Arc Daily. It actually was in the Arc Daily, but this is an actual installation, and those are real people suspended from, a real net. So this is an installation in Germany where, if you were brave enough, you could actually walk into this thing and interact with it. It also included inflatable sections, but it was all he did was just take a series of nets and spread them across this atrium and allowed people to interact with it and walk through it and touch it and walk on it. Like I said, if you were brave enough. So taking those examples, I went on this trip with these fine gentlemen here. Steve Coy took me to Lisbon in Portugal. This is a neighborhood in Portugal called Barro Alto. If you're familiar with Lisbon, you know this area, and you probably have drank there many a times. But Barro Alto is in complete and absolute total flux day and night. It transforms so much from day to night. It's unbelievable. This is during the day. It's a very quiet neighborhood. There's a couple of people hanging out. This is at night. So this is like right around the corner, same street. And yeah, there's a guy in a dress and a guy wearing multiple hats. So day, night, you get the idea. It's crazy. It's insane there. The rent is very cheap because you have to be nocturnal in order to live there. Another way that Lisbon is also always in change is that they have these cafes outside, but every night they have to close up the cafe and they put everything that's outside inside. And then in the morning they put out 1 or 2 chairs and 1 umbrella. And they allow people to come out and a couple of people have their coffee, their espresso, they sit and they eat a treat. And then during the noon rush, they put out more chairs, and then in the evening, when it's the dinner rush, they'll come out and they'll put out 50 sets of tables, and they'll put the dining ware out, and they'll put the cups and everything out. So it's interesting to see that there's no real reaction from the buildings to this happening right outside the door. Is that it's constantly changing the amount of people that are using the space or interacting with that. So for the project that I did in the brief time that we were there had to do with the transformation of space and the expansion and contraction of space based on that. What if there was a restaurant where it was a very small enclosure, and then during lunch it got a little bit bigger, and at the dinner time it expanded completely and it could fit tons of people, and then after that it closed back automatically. What if that was a structure? And so I took a look at the simplest muse I could find in this condition, having very, very limited resources, being abroad, was umbrellas. So if you take an umbrella and you flip it upside down, it kind of has this opening quality. And if you put multiple umbrellas together, it can open up into a structure and make kind of a pavilion that opens and closes, expands and contracts space. So put it into drawings. Always renderings and images that you make on the computer are perfect. Obviously, Jim Stevens will tell you the real world is not. And when you don't have any tools and you don't have any resources and any money and any time, you have to make do with what you can. So we had fun. Found some fabric, and I would force people to help me, walk through the park and parade these things around and open them and close them. And people thought we were a dragon, and people thought we were making a play, and it was lots of fun. But people responded to it, and they talked to us. But the final iteration that we came to, we ended up putting out on a beach one day, on a very sunny afternoon when we had class on the beach. It was a full-size structure, and that was it in its closed form. It was just taller than a human being, but when you expanded the whole thing, it almost quadrupled the volume inside the space, and it could fit the whole group. So we actually ended up having our class inside the structure. And then multiple people come and kind of ask what was going on and walk into it and walk out of it. The whole idea was, the expansion so that people can enter the space. It could, you could use it for entrance and exit. You could use it to hold more people. This is Steve Coy coming in after he did his surfing to give us our lecture that day. It was a pretty crazy class day, but that was our attempt at dealing with architecture in the public realm at this point. So Brandon will talk a little bit more about social messaging using the same medium.
Hi there. All right, so bring it back around to, can everyone hear me without the mic? So bringing it back to the beginning, Steve talking about how street art is a catalyst for change. It's a spectacle, and as Guy Debord said, it's that moment in someone's day when they realize something's different, and that's the change. In Lisbon, what I focused on was the LGBT culture. And, it's on a whole underrepresented within the street art world. But I'll go into a few examples here. One of the most recent, with the new marriage, gays can get married now, and this is in Ireland. Joe Caslin, is pretty prolific artist in Ireland. And with this recent ruling, he's done a number of pieces. Here's another one. Someone, Steve and I actually met, Kashink. She came out to Murals on the Market for past September or so. She's French and pretty zany, I'd say. Yeah, she has a tattooed mustache. She gave me Sour Patch Kids. It was nice. But she's actually incredibly interested in diversity, such as this. And she's been a forerunner. She does the same thing. She goes all over the world. And most recently, dealing with gay marriage. Here's another one by her. And then going back to Lisbon, kind of what Phil was talking about is everyone is incredibly tolerant, is what we found. And I think kind of what we assumed is because they were in a dictatorship, they know what it's like to have freedom stripped from them. So it was, the LGBT culture wasn't incredibly visible. There was an LGBT neighborhood, but it was so well integrated, it was very surprising. So I was fortunate enough to actually get a piece at the gallery we showed at in El Shish Factory. And using iconic symbolism and imagery, this one in particular, Lucas Cranach, the younger, did a series of paintings, also his father, Lucas Cranach, the elder. And taking these iconic imageries, people are like, oh, Adam and Eve. And, this isn't the first time that this has been shown, but in a public art setting, it has. And I developed this as well. And then Saint Sebastian was kind of like I kind of had to dig deep. And Saint Sebastian is a Christian martyr and was adopted by the LGBT community multiple times. He died for, believing in God. And it's kind of likened to a coming out story, being shot by arrows, but not dying and overcoming that. And the last piece, not leaving out the T in LGBT. This is a transsexual piece that I developed. The neighborhood we lived in Lisbon, the students anyway, is very well known for transsexual prostitutes. It's actually comforting because, they've been through some stuff. So, they kind of had our back. There wasn't any a bad rapport. And the neighborhood did not feel unsafe, But this was on one of the major roads going through our neighborhood, highly visible. This is a corner that, they stand at, every corner in the neighborhood. But the idea is it's a chrysalis. So this man is becoming a woman and stripping away what's left of the molt. And that's all I got for you guys. But I think it's important to understand is that running into that moment during your day and seeing something that you don't expect is a way to convey that street art.
Questions? Do do you want to run around and hand the mic off for questions?
Questions? Okay.
Doesn't want it to be recorded.
This is recorded?
Yeah. As I was looking at your work, and obviously I've followed you for several years, but it just struck me that there seems to be a conflict in the construction of the corporation as a public identity and the production of work which is classifiably illegal. And I mean, there's an interesting loop between those two things, because there's both the exposure and the ability of people to then understand who you are exactly, while you're doing things which you could be legally prosecuted for. I mean, is this something that you ever deal with? Or, I mean, does the corporation give you protections from lawsuits?
Yeah, it's actually, it's really interesting because as the project has grown, I now collaborate with a CPA and a lawyer, right? And I mean, that's the honest truth. And the CPA says, I might have to file this form that no one in the history of CPAs has ever had to file. And he's like, I don't know if I want to file it because I'm going to start getting all these weird requests, right? And the lawyer too, he's like, these guys were joking that they know him as well. It was like, he's not answering your phone calls anymore, you know? So, but yes, we do. We look at the legal system and how we can, potentially exploit it, hopefully for the better, through the legal corporation. But yeah, there could be a conflict. I mean, to me, the most interesting thing that could happen is we go public, and the biggest problem is that our shareholders could sue us for not bringing the corporation value, right? And so what would happen is we would essentially be having a court argument about what constitutes something as valuable, right? Which I think is what's an interesting underlying message about the project anyway. So I might welcome it, I don't know.
You talked about it in your corporation. You had the 3 levels: executives, what were the other two? Transporters and extractors. And when you're planning or positioning your work, your public work, are these sites specific to those roles, that the identities that are associated with the characters?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, everything that you see is so intentional, from the fonts that we use, to the location, to even the name is referencing. The name came from this absurdist Dada text book that was talking about dress reform movement. So we've appropriated that name, and with that comes the meaning from it. Not that it's accessible to anybody, but it's still there. So every moment that you see, from the gas mask, it all carries a symbolism with it. I mean, I've read public comments where people are saying that it's like Illuminati and all of these because we use so much symbolism in it, and I find it to be humorous. I enjoy that speculation. We want it to be somewhat mysterious. We don't want to just spoon feed everybody. I think it's as deep as you want to dig into it, and it's also can be so shallow that somebody looks at that and says, you kind of snap them out of their spectacle, as we were talking about. These guys were reinforcing, and then they just walk back on their day and continue thinking about what they were thinking about. And then there's other people that realize that each piece unfolds unlocks a different piece of the narrative, right? And so even the commercial piece that you see, the television commercial that we aired, we talked about doing a mini series so we can unfold a narrative through a series of commercials, right? So one week it's episode 1, and then week 2, it's episode 2. Okay. Okay.
Something onto a surface where you actually like a smart window. Are you familiar with that type of technology? And architecture, like instead of having a drywalled wall, maybe it's an actual wall that is like almost like a
touch screen?
Yeah, like a touch screen. I mean, I see more and more of that technology coming out, and I just kind of see like in the future we're going to have a lot more surfaces and an architecture that can be manipulated in different ways. I was just wondering if you've done anything like that.
Yeah, I haven't. I'm always researching that kind of technology because I'm interested in it. You can see that the future projection of the work is to do those interactive pieces. And right now, we're using the technology that makes it the cheapest and easiest, right? So that piece will be executed with rear projection screen film onto a window, projector behind it, and like a Connect camera that is will measure motion and heat. But yeah, I mean, I've looked in right now what they have. There's obviously like the touch screen technology that you're talking about, and then there's also LED panels that have motion sensors in it that could function. There's always a give, right? So like the way that we're doing it right now is probably the best that is available now. But I think that they're working on video screens that are going to be like paper thin, right? Or even more so, that like we're probably going to have video card advertisements eventually on our credit cards. Or like you want to change the color in your house, you press a button, and it's just, we're getting to that point of technology. And so I'll always be researching that and thinking about how I can hack that for my own purposes, right? Like I would love to put gifts in the street, like a wheat paste, like what? So. That. If you guys have any questions for the students too.
It seems like as street art has gained popularity, a lot of the political commentary has become more and more popular in larger entertainment. So when you were talking about your IPO, it reminded me a lot of John Oliver's, what was it, Our Lady of Eternal Exemption that he did, making a mega church, and I think they collected $200,000 just to prove how ridiculous it is to build a mega church. So in your work, do you find that you need to have that separation between kind of crossing over into entertainment? Would you be willing to or interested in taking on kind of an entertainment partner or a sponsor, or does that lessen the message? That's a really good question. I suppose I would consider it, because I think any medium could be appropriated as a medium of art. I mean, we didn't draw the line at a television commercial. And what I love about that is somebody's sitting in their family room, and it's like, it's even more invasive than street art, right? You have to be outside walking to run into this thing, but there you're just trying to watch the Ellen DeGeneres show, and then here we are, this thing that like invades your day. So I think it depends on the circumstance, but certainly, I mean, we had talked about, back when the Steve Colbert show was on, we had talked about, trying to contact them, and I don't know if there was an appropriate, because his whole thing was essentially a performance as well, so we could go on and perform as this corporation from an IPO, and he, so I think it depends, is the, I think maybe lame answer, I'm sorry, to do that, but yeah, I think we're open to, pushing the boundaries, I think, in every direction. Sky messages. Right?
To borrow a line from Arlo Guthrie in his Thanksgiving Day Massacre recording. You know that one? No, what is this? Arlo Guthrie tells a story. He wants to join the army, so he goes to the recruiting place, and he's being interviewed, and the sergeant says to him, have you ever been arrested? And so then he breaks into this story about dumping garbage off the side of a cliff in Massachusetts. Alice's Restaurant. So, have you ever been arrested because of this? And you don't have to reveal your. You can put on a different persona.
I actually have not ever been arrested, and it's it's fairly easy to get permission, and I also, I don't know if I should say this or not, but I'm gonna say it anyway. We go out and work in broad daylight, and sometimes I'll put on a hard hat and like a jacket, so I'm working in plain sight, and it doesn't look like I'm doing anything illegal if it's not 2 a.m. and I'm holding a spray can. And so we've had police roll up and get out, and I just kept working, and they didn't ask me what I was doing, they were asking me how I was doing it, right? So the conversation was a little bit different. I guess I run that risk. I do try to get permission when I can, but if I really like the place and I really like the location, I really like the idea, I won't let that become a barrier, I guess. The fines? Oh yeah, there's big fines now. Shepherd Ferry ruined it for us. Here.
It also makes it pretty hard to go rogue with your pieces, especially now in Detroit with the fines they're giving building owners. So say like Lisbon, it's everywhere. In Europe, everywhere. But here in Detroit, it's hard because you don't want to put the building owner at fault. You don't want the building owner to pay for what you've done, something that's generally positive. So it's kind of difficult in Detroit.
Also, Lisbon's government actually has an art council that decides public art placement. So if whenever we wanted to do things there, like people can actually go to this art registry. They're actually like a part of the government. They accept public art, but they also fund public art projects. So Detroit's government versus Lisbon's government is like night and day. Lisbon is extremely supportive, and hopefully that's something else that cities can learn from, because they can actually provide locations. They can say that wall works, and we will not only help you getting approval from the property owner, but we'll pay for you to do it on that wall. Just don't do it on this wall. So.
When to that point, when I think it was the first week we were in Lisbon, Jordan and I got to meet with city officials in like a 16th century palace and sit down with them and talk about where they wanted us to paint. So it was quite a different experience than what I've experienced here.
What's the status of the IPO?
I missed a call from my lawyer during this lecture. We are really close. We have all the legal documents need to be edited, and then we're ready. Yeah. We're down to all the insurance has been purchased. We're down to a shareholder agreement and bylaws, which I think some other people in this room know a lot about how long it takes to do bylaws. Thank you.